What happens when one of Hollywood's most polarizing figures walks onto one of daytime television's most unpredictable stages, sits down across from a woman who has spent decades saying exactly what she thinks, and tries to control a narrative that she has been carefully crafting for years? What happens when the cameras are rolling, the audience is watching, and suddenly the interview stops feeling like a conversation and starts feeling like a courtroom? That is exactly what unfolded the day Meghan Markle sat across from Joy Behar on The View. And by the time it was over, nobody in that studio, or watching at home, could quite believe what they had just witnessed. Before we get into it, drop a comment below and tell us, are you Team Meghan or Team Joy? And if you are new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is the kind of content we live for. Now, let us get into it. The energy in the studio that morning was different from the moment Meghan walked out. The audience applause was enthusiastic, generous even, but there was something underneath it, a kind of collective holding of breath. The way a crowd goes quiet just before something spectacular or something catastrophic. Meghan smiled, waved, settled into her chair with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times. Someone who understands that the way you sit, the way you cross your ankles, the way you let your eyes land softly on the person across from you, all of it is part of the performance. And Meghan Markle, whatever else you want to say about her, has always understood performance. Joy Behar was watching her, not with hostility, not yet, but with the particular attention of a woman who has interviewed enough people to know when someone comes to a table with an agenda. Joy has been doing this long enough to have sat across from presidents, comedians, dictators of public opinion, and everyone in between. She does not get nervous. She does not get dazzled, and she does not, under any circumstances, let a guest run the room. The other hosts opened warmly. There were compliments about Meghan's recent projects, gentle questions about her life in California, the kind of softballs that ease a guest into comfort. Meghan answered beautifully. She was charming, articulate, funny, in the self-deprecating way that she has clearly rehearsed until it feels natural. She talked about finding peace, about building something new, about the importance of telling your own story. The audience loved it. The applause was generous. And then Joy leaned forward. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but anyone who watches The View regularly knows what it means. When Joy Behar leans forward, it means the comfortable part of the interview is over. Meghan, she said, and her voice was calm, almost gentle. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know I am asking it with respect, because I do respect you. But I also think our audience deserves honesty, and I think you are someone who says she values honesty. So, here it is. The studio went very quiet. You have talked a lot, in interviews, in your podcast, in the documentary, about wanting to share your truth. And I understand that. I believe that people have the right to tell their stories. But here is what I am struggling with. Every time someone from the other side of that story tries to share their truth, there are legal letters, there is silence that gets enforced. So my question is, when you say you want the world to hear your truth, do you also believe that the people you are talking about have an equal right to respond? The audience made a sound, not quite a gasp, something between surprise and recognition. Meghan's smile did not fall. She is too skilled for that. But something shifted behind her eyes, a very slight recalibration, the look of someone who came in expecting a particular kind of conversation, and is now realizing they are in a different one entirely. Joy, she said, and her voice was warm, measured, patient in the way that can sometimes read as condescending. I think that is a really important question, and I want to answer it properly, because I think there is a misconception about what I have been trying to do. Please, Joy said, go ahead. I have never tried to silence anyone. I have never said that the people I have spoken about do not have voices. They have enormous platforms. They have the full backing of an institution that has been managing its image for over 1,000 years. What I have tried to do is simply exist. To speak, to say, this is what happened to me. This is how I felt. This is my experience. And every time I do that, it gets framed as an attack. It was a good answer. It hit the right notes. The audience responded with a ripple of applause. But Joy was not done. I hear you, she said, and I take that seriously. But I want to push back on one thing, and I hope you will let me, because I think it matters. She paused just long enough for the pause to mean something. You said they have enormous platforms, and that is true, but you also have an enormous platform. You have a Netflix deal. You have had a podcast. You are sitting on this show right now with millions of people watching. So the idea that there is some massive imbalance in who gets to speak, I am not sure that holds up the way you are presenting it. Meghan tilted her head slightly. I think there is a difference, she said, between having a platform and having protection. Can you explain what you mean by that? I mean that when I speak as an individual, a private person. When mistakes are made, when things go wrong, I face the consequences publicly and without institutional support. When other parties speak, or when narratives are shaped in other directions, there are entire systems in place to manage that. Communications teams, palace briefings, sources who are never named. That is not a platform. That is infrastructure. Joy nodded slowly. That is a fair distinction, she said, and then, after a beat, but I want to ask you about something specific. If you do not mind, of course, there have been people, staff members, people who worked closely with you during your time as a working royal, who have made claims that were quite serious about the environment around you, about how they were treated, and those claims were investigated. And I know you dispute the findings, but my question is not about the findings. My question is, do you think those people, the ones who made those claims, had a right to be heard? The temperature in the room changed. Not dramatically, but it changed. Meghan was quiet for just a moment longer than she had been at any previous point in the interview. It was a small thing, that pause, but on live television, a small thing can feel enormous. I think, she said carefully, that anyone who feels they have been harmed deserves to have their experience taken seriously. I believe that completely, even if their experience contradicts yours. Joy. Meghan's voice was still calm, but something in it had sharpened. I have to be honest with you. I think the framing of this question puts me in an impossible position. You are asking me to validate claims that were made about me, claims that caused enormous pain to my family, claims that I fundamentally dispute, and you are framing it as a question about whether I believe people deserve to be heard. Of course I believe that, but believing that does not mean I have to accept as truth something that I know to be untrue. Joy looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was not unkind, but it was knowing. Here is the thing, Meghan, she said. You are very good at this. You are very, very good at taking a difficult question and landing in a place that sounds completely reasonable. And maybe it is completely reasonable. But I have been doing this for a long time, and when I see someone pivot that gracefully, I always want to know what they are pivoting away from. The audience reacted, a mixture of sounds, laughter, surprise, something like tension. Meghan looked at Joy directly. Then ask me, she said, ask me what you actually want to know. Joy smiled wider. Oh, I intend to, she said. Trust me, I intend to. And that is exactly what Joy did. She did not rush it. That is the thing about Joy Behar that people sometimes underestimate. She has this ability to let a moment breathe, to let it sit in the air just long enough that everyone in the room feels the weight of it before she speaks. And in that pause, after Meghan had issued her challenge, after she had looked Joy directly in the eye and said, ask me what you actually want to know, Joy smiled, and then she asked it. I want to talk about the word victim, Joy said, because it has come up a lot, in interviews, in the documentary, in conversations around you and your story. And I am not saying that word is wrong. I am not saying your experiences were not real or painful. What I am asking is this. Do you think there is a point at which leaning into that word, that identity, becomes a way of avoiding accountability? And I am asking that as someone who genuinely believes in holding powerful institutions responsible. But I also believe that accountability has to go in all directions. The studio was very still. Meghan looked at Joy for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had changed, just slightly. The warmth was still there, but underneath it, something had sharpened, something more genuine, less rehearsed. I think, she said slowly, that is a question that gets asked of women, and specifically of women of color, in ways that it does not get asked of other people. When a man describes the way he was treated by an institution and the psychological toll it took on him, we do not ask him if he is leaning too hard into we call it bravery. But when a woman does it, when she describes what that experience felt like from the inside, suddenly it becomes self-pity. Suddenly, she needs to answer for herself in ways that the institution never does. There was applause. Genuine, not polite. Joy nodded. That is a fair point, she said, and I take it seriously, truly, but I want to be careful here, because I think you just did something very skillful, which is you moved the conversation from the specific to the general, and the specific is what I am interested in. She paused. There are people who would look at your life, at the deals, the platforms, the Netflix series, the podcast, the interviews, the memoir, and say that the narrative of being silenced does not quite fit, that you have had more opportunities to speak, to shape public opinion, to tell your story in your own words, than almost anyone, and I want to give you the chance to respond to that directly, not in the abstract. Directly. Meghan was quiet for a beat. You are right that I have a platform, she said. I would never deny that. But I want you to think about the timeline, because everything you just listed, everything I have built since leaving, all of that came after years of being told to stay quiet, after years of watching things said about me that were not true, and being instructed, genuinely instructed, not to correct them, after my mental health deteriorated to a point where I was scared for my life, and I was told that getting help publicly would be bad for the institution. All of those platforms you are describing, I built them because I had to, because the alternative was silence, and that silence was destroying me. Joy leaned forward slightly. You said your mental health deteriorated to a point where you were scared for your life. Those are very serious words, and I want to treat them seriously. But I also want to ask you something. You made those claims in a very public way, in a very produced documentary, with a team around you, with a narrative arc, and some people found that jarring. The intimacy of what you were describing, alongside the very polished way it was presented. Do you understand why some people were skeptical? Meghan nodded. I understand why people found it uncomfortable, she said. I think that is actually part of the problem. We are not comfortable watching women, especially women in positions of visibility, be that vulnerable. It disrupts a story people have already decided they want to tell. If I am the villain, if I am the difficult one, the ambitious one who knew what she was getting into and wanted the fame without the responsibility, then my being genuinely vulnerable threatens that story, and rather than update the story, it is easier to question my sincerity. Or, Joy said, and her voice was measured, careful. It is genuinely difficult to separate sincerity from strategy when the vulnerability is packaged and sold. The room reacted, a murmur, not quite applause, not quite tension. Something in between. Meghan looked at Joy, and for the first time in the interview, her expression was something close to raw. That is a really painful thing to hear, she said quietly, because I cannot prove sincerity to you. No one can. All I can tell you is that what I described was real, that the night I am referring to was real, that my husband sat with me through it and it was real, and the fact that telling that story was also, in some way, professionally useful, does not make the experience itself less true. Joy held her gaze. No, she said, it does not. I believe you. She paused. But here is where I need to push a little further, because we have been talking about your pain and your experience, and I do not want to diminish that at all. What I want to also talk about is the impact, not on you, on others. Meghan waited. There are two elderly people, Joy said carefully, who have, by most accounts, significantly deteriorated in health over the last several years. There is a family that has been publicly fractured in a way that is, by any measure, unusual and painful. There is a brother who has said things in public that suggest the estrangement is deep and may not heal. And you have been, regardless of how you feel about the causes, a central figure in all of that. Not the only figure, not necessarily the main cause, but a central one, and I want to ask you, not as an accusation, but as a genuine question, does that weigh on you? Meghan was silent for a moment that felt very long. Every single day, she said. Her voice was quieter now. I want you to understand something. I did not leave because I wanted to blow anything up. I did not leave because I was making a calculated career move. I left because we had exhausted every other option. I left because my son was about to be born, and I needed him to grow up with a mother who was alive and present. And yes, the collateral damage of that decision has been real, and it has been painful, and there is not a day that goes by where I do not think about it. Joy nodded slowly. I appreciate you saying that, she said. I do, and I want to give you something in return, which is my honest read of this conversation so far. She looked at Meghan steadily. You are one of the most composed interview subjects I have ever spoken to, and I mean that as a genuine observation, not a criticism. You know when to be vulnerable, and you know when to pivot, and you know when to reframe, and that is a skill. It is probably a necessary one given everything you have been through, but it also means that I am never entirely sure when I am talking to Meghan and when I am talking to the version of Meghan that has been very carefully constructed for public consumption. And I think the audience at home is probably wondering the same thing. The silence that followed was different from the ones that had come before. It was not a pause before a pivot. It was a woman sitting with something that had actually landed. That is fair, Meghan said finally. And then, after a moment, I think the honest answer is that after years of having your story told for you, by other people, in ways that bear no resemblance to your reality, you do develop a kind of armor. You do become strategic about how you speak and what you say and how you say it. Because the alternative is to be completely open and completely unguarded and to have that used against you, again. So yes, there is a constructed version of me that shows up in interviews. But I would ask you, Joy, with everything you know about this industry and everything you have seen in 40 years of doing this work, which one of us does not do that? Joy looked at her for a long moment, and then she laughed. Not a dismissive laugh, a genuine one. The kind that means someone has actually said something that landed. You know what, Joy said, that might be the most honest thing you have said all morning. The audience laughed with her, and for just a moment the tension in the room lifted. But anyone watching closely could see that Joy was not done, because there was one more thing she had not asked yet. One more corner of the story she had been circling since the beginning, and Meghan, for all her composure, seemed to sense it coming. Stay with us, because what Joy said next stopped the entire studio. Joy let the laughter settle. She let the warmth of it fill the room for just a few seconds, long enough for everyone to exhale, long enough for Meghan to feel like perhaps the hardest part was behind her. And then Joy picked up her notes, glanced down at them briefly, and looked back up with the expression of someone who has been waiting all morning to ask the one question that actually matters. I want to talk about Harry, Joy said. The shift in the room was immediate, not dramatic, just a kind of collective realignment, the way people lean forward slightly when they sense something real is about to happen. Not in a tabloid way, Joy continued. Not who did what to whom. I want to ask you about something more fundamental. Because from the outside, what a lot of people observe is a man who has walked away from his family, from his country, from an institution he was born into, from friendships and relationships that went back decades. And the reason most people understand for all of that is you, that the love he has for you is what drove those decisions. And I think most people find that romantic. I think they want to believe in it. But I also think there is a harder question underneath it, which is whether you ever worry that the cost of that love has been too high. For him, Meghan held very still. I asked that, Joy said, not to be cruel, but because I think it is the question that sits underneath everything else, and I think you are smart enough to have asked it yourself. For a long moment, Meghan said nothing, and when she spoke, her voice was different from any register she had used so far in the interview. Quieter, less shaped. I think about it, she said. Of course, I think about it. Anyone who told you they were certain that every sacrifice their partner made was worth it would be lying to you, or lying to themselves. Marriage is not a transaction where you can audit the costs and confirm the balance. What I can tell you is that my husband is not a passive person. He is not someone who was led somewhere he did not choose to go. The decisions he made as an adult with full knowledge of what they would mean. And he has never, not once, expressed regret to me about any of them. But does he express it to other people? Joy asked quietly. I cannot speak to private conversations I am not part of, Meghan said. Fair, Joy said, but there are people who have spoken publicly. His own family members, former friends, people who have described a man who seems, in their observation, to be struggling, isolated, and I am not asking you to validate those accounts. I am asking you how you respond to them. When you read something like that, when you hear that characterization of your husband, what do you feel? Anger, Meghan said immediately. And then, after a pause, and sadness. Because I know who he is. I know how hard he has worked on his mental health, on his sense of self, on building a life that he actually chose, rather than one that was handed to him with no consideration for who he was as a person. And when I see that reduced to a narrative of a man who was manipulated into abandoning his family, it is not just inaccurate. It is a deeply unfair thing to do to a grown man. It strips him of all agency. It treats him as though he is incapable of making his own decisions. And the irony is that the people doing that are the same people who claim to love him. Joy nodded. I think that is well said, she replied, and I agree with you that the narrative of him, as purely a victim of your influence, is reductive, and probably sexist in its own way. But I want to stay with the question of isolation for a moment. Because you both left, you both moved, you both stepped back. And in the time since, his relationships with his father and his brother have not recovered. His grandmother passed without a full reconciliation. Those are losses that are real, whatever the cause. And I want to ask you, not who is responsible, but what it is like to share a life with someone who is carrying that kind of grief. Meghan was quiet for a moment. It is one of the heaviest things I have ever witnessed, she said. To watch someone grieve people who are still alive, to watch someone love people who have chosen, repeatedly, to prioritize an institution over a son and a brother, and to not be able to fix it. Because I cannot fix it. No one can fix it except the people involved. All I can do is be there. All I can do is make sure that our home is a place where he is seen and loved, and not defined by any of that. Joy looked at her steadily. You said they chose an institution over a son. That is a strong statement. It is what I believe, Meghan said simply. And you understand, Joy said, that they would tell a very different story about that choice. I understand that completely, Meghan said, and I am not asking anyone to take my word for it. I am telling you what I have witnessed and what I believe. Those are two things I am entitled to. Joy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to ask you one final thing, and I want you to know that I am asking it with genuine curiosity, not with any desire to trap you or score a point. We are near the end of our time, and I want to make sure we end somewhere real. Meghan nodded. Please, if you could go back, Joy said. Not to change what you did, not to undo the decisions, but just to do one thing differently. To say one thing differently, or handle one moment differently. Is there anything? The question sat in the room, and this time the pause was not strategic. It was not the pause of someone choosing their words carefully to protect a narrative. It was the pause of someone actually thinking. There is a conversation, Meghan said slowly, that I wish had happened earlier, before things became public, before positions became fixed, where I sat across from certain people and said, I need you to hear me, not as a problem to be managed, not as a complication in a plan, but as a person, as someone your family member loves, as someone who is struggling and needs to know she is not alone in this institution. She paused. I do not know if it would have changed anything. I genuinely do not, but I wish I had tried harder to have that conversation before I had it with the rest of the world. The studio was very quiet. Joy looked at her for a long moment, and then she said, that is the most unguarded thing you have said today. You asked for something real, Meghan said. I did, Joy said, and I appreciate it. She leaned back slightly, and something in her posture shifted. the interrogator stepping back, the woman coming forward. Look, I have pushed you hard today, and I want you to know that is not personal. It is the same thing I would do, and have done, with anyone who comes on this show with a story this large and this consequential. You held your own. I will give you that completely. You are very good at this, Meghan said, and this time, the compliment did not sound like deflection. It sounded like one professional acknowledging another. 40 years of practice, Joy said, and then she smiled. The real one, not the knowing one. And I will tell you something. The moment that got me, the one I am going to be thinking about after we go to commercial, was when you talked about grieving people who are still alive. Because I think that is something that a lot of people watching today understand from their own lives. Whatever they think about you, whatever side of this they have landed on, that feeling is universal. Meghan looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read. Not gratitude exactly. Something quieter than that. That is all I have ever wanted, she said softly. For people to hear something in my story that connects to their own. Not to agree with me, not to take my side. Just to recognize something human in it. Joy held her gaze. Some of them will, she said, and some of them will not. That is the deal you made when you decided to speak. I know, Meghan said. I made it with my eyes open. Joy nodded once, and then she turned to the camera with the particular expression of a woman who has done this long enough to know when a conversation has reached its natural and honest end. It was one of the most extraordinary exchanges daytime television had seen in years. Not because anyone was destroyed, not because a villain was exposed or a hero was crowned, but because two women sat across from each other and neither one of them blinked. And by the time it was over, the audience at home was left with something rarer than drama. They were left with something that actually made them think. And that is the thing about Joy Behar. After 40 years, she still knows exactly what she is doing. If this video made you think, or made you feel something, drop a comment below and tell us. Whose side were you on by the end? And did that change at any point during the conversation? We read every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Because this is exactly the kind of content we bring you every week. We will see you in the next one.